report in 2025 Corruption Perceptions Index (CPI) that was jointly released on February 10, 2026 by Transparency International and others saw Sierra Leone scored 34 out of 100, ranking Sierra Leone 109th out of 186 countries and territories surveyed. This latest score represents a recovery from the 2024 CPI, where the country dropped to a score of 33 and a rank of 114th. However, since 2028, Sierra Leone has generally improved its standing, moving up from a rank of 129 to its current position. Sierra Leone's score of 34 remains slightly above the sub-Saharan African average, which typically hovers around 30 to 33. In addition to the ranking, Sierra Leone recently scored 71% in the 2026 Millennium Challenge Corporation, the MCC, also the Control of Corruption Indicator. The Transparency International CPI is a leading global indicator of public sector corruption, ranking 180 countries on a scale where 0 is highly corrupt and 100 is very clean. So this morning, to discuss the progress and the fight against corruption, we have Edward Koroma, Acting Executive Director, Transparency International Sierra Leone, and we're also hoping to have Abubakar Toure, Director of Outreach and Public Relations, the Anti-Corruption Commission. Good morning and welcome to the program.
Good morning, Marina, and good morning, people of Sierra Leone. It's a pleasure to be here this morning.
Let's look at the figures. Sierra Leone scored 34 out of 100 in 2025 for the CPI. Would you say this is a genuine progress or statistically fluctuating?
Well, I would not say it is statistically fluctuating, but this is a genuine progress to some extent with regards to the fight against corruption in Sierra Leone. But before I continue, let me just make a quick correction here, because there is a slight typo with regards to the number of countries that we are surveyed. It's 182 instead of 186 countries.
Okay. Thank you.
So we are ranked 109 out of 182 countries. Now, you made mention of the Millennium Challenge Corporation, the MCC scorecard, where Sierra Leone is being ranked over 70, 80. They are looking at the control of corruption. But this one, the Corruption Perception Index, is looking at corruption from various angles. The MCC looks at corruption, the control of corruption, and wherein you have the Anti-Corruption Commission that has the legal mandate to take the lead in the fight against corruption. So when you talk about the control of corruption, the first thing that comes to mind is the Anti-Corruption Commission. And when you talk about the Anti-Corruption Commission, you look at the laws, that governs the operations of the Anti-Corruption Commission. That is the Anti-Corruption Act. And you'll agree with me that we have one of the strongest, anti-corruption laws in Africa. And other countries are coming to learn from us. And the Anti-Corruption Commission has done so much to position themselves in terms of fighting corruption. So the MCC, looking at control of corruption, focuses more, on the institution that takes the lead in the fight against corruption. Look at the law, see how they have positioned themselves in terms of fighting corruption. So we could score, over 70, 80 in that area. But for the Corruption Perception Index, it does not only focus on the institution that is responsible to take the lead in terms of controlling corruption. It also looks at the enablers of corruption, other areas, talking about freedom, access to information. It talks about the judiciary. It talks about parliament. It talks about the executive, that is the presidency, and all of those things is what the CPI looks at. And so, for the 2024 CPI, which was launched in 2025, earlier this year, we see Sierra Leone dropped 2 places from 35 to 33. That was the 2024. And now for the 2025 CPI that was launched yesterday, we've moved one place upwards from 33 to 34. Right. So this has been the trend in terms of the fight against corruption in Sierra Leone when we look at it holistically, not only focusing on the institution that is responsible in taking the lead in terms of fighting corruption in Sierra Leone. So this is how we have been moving. So when you look at the whole picture that the CPI focuses on, looking at the Anti-Corruption Commission and how they position themselves, so we are at that particular area. The other areas where we need to focus on, much has not been done. That is why year in, year out, when the audit report comes out, you will see issues, of embezzlement. You look at Parliament, you will hear about issues relating to corruption, the executive and some other areas. So we'll see here that because the Anti-Corruption Commission is doing some tremendous work, we'll give them that. We have a strong anti-corruption law. We are around that same 30.
But do you personally think? Let me hold you there for a minute. Yes, but do you think we're really, to be honest, we're really making progress when it comes to the issue of corruption in our country?
Yeah, definitely we are making progress. Yeah, because before this time, in 2018, we scored like 30, if we look at the trend, of scores from the CPI, since 2012, to date. Because we started before 2012 ranking countries around the world. Because TI is engaging at international and national level to ensure that countries and governments have laws in place, that position them in terms of fighting corruption. So in 2012, we reviewed how we do the ranking of countries. So if we want to look at the trend analysis, we take from 2012 to date. So like in 2012, we scored 31, over 100. Then coming down, 2015, we dropped to 29. And then 2016, 17, 18, 30, 30, 30. 2019, 33 over 100. Then coming to 2021, 34, 22, 34, 23, 35, 2024, 33, and then 2025, 34. So we see that we are in the region, of the 30s. We are making progress in terms of fighting corruption, but this progress that we are making is not tangible enough. This is what we'll regard as baby steps in terms of fighting corruption. And for a country that has been plunged into this kind of state of poverty as a result of corruption, people want to see the country doing more in terms of fighting corruption. So it goes beyond the Anti-Corruption Commission that takes the lead, that everybody has to take the responsibility. All the MDAs, has to take the responsibility to ensure that we have mechanisms in place to fight corruption. If we want to see ourselves moving beyond the average of 50, going to 60, 70, where we want to see our country in terms of this global ranking.
Quickly before Mattia take it up from here, we have with us in the studio Abubakar Toure, who is the Director of Outreach and Public Relations at the Anti-Corruption Commission. But quickly, for people that hold the view that, the CPI measures just perceptions and not the actual corruption level, what would you say to that?
Right. Thank you very much for that question. Mostly, when you measure corruption, you measure the perception of people, what people think about corruption. Because corruption, is illegal. And most of the time, it happens behind closed doors. Transactions happened under the table. It is not done in public. So if you say you want to ask people to give you tangible, evidence of corruption, it's difficult for you to get the feedback that you want. That's the more reason why a parliamentarian says some time ago that Parliament is corrupt, and they ask him to provide the evidence. So it's difficult to provide evidence for us in terms of looking at corruption. So most of the time what we do, we look at the perception. We gauge the perception of people in terms of what they think, about corruption. And for the CPI, what we do, we do not put boots on the ground as Transparency International, because if you want to measure like 182 countries and you say you send people on the ground to interview and then put their report together, it's very, very much cumbersome and very, very expensive to do that. So what we do is that we look at institutions, institutions that are credible, that have done studies, quantitative studies on countries with regards issues of corruption, and those findings of those reports is what we put together to score and rank countries. Now, for the 2025 CPI, the sources that we looked at is a total of 13 sources we looked at to rank the 182 countries. For Sierra Leone specifically, we looked at 8 countries. 8 studies is what we looked at to rank Sierra Leone. And if I could name them quickly, we have the African Development Bank Country Policy and Institutional Assessment. That report was published in 2023. Then we have the Bertelsmann Foundation for Sustainable Governance Indicators. That was published in 2024. Then we have the Global Insight Corruption Risk Rating, published in 2024. The PPRC International Country Risk Guide, published in 2025, the Varieties of Democracy Project, published in 2025, World Bank Country Policy and Institutional Assessment, published in 2024, and the World Justice Rule of Law Project Index, published in 2025. So these are the 8 sources that we use. The report, the findings of those reports is what we collated, to score and rank Sierra Leone. And you will see year in, year out, the number of countries, targeted sometimes rise, sometimes fall. Last year we had about 189 or so, and now we have 182. For a country, to be assessed under the CPI, at least 3 of these, institutions should have conducted study in your country. So this is how we go about, putting this report together to rank and score countries around the world. Because it's not only about engaging governments to ensure that they put laws in place to fight corruption, because that's the work of Transparency International, but again, it's good for us to go on the ground, do assessment, come out to report, and look at areas where countries need to look at if they want to make the fight against corruption meaningful, so that we'll see progress. Because at the end of the day, we want to see sub-Saharan Africa moving out of the average score of like 32. That is what the 2025 report indicates, that the average for the sub-Saharan Africa is like 32. And we only have, few countries that moved above, about 4 that move above 50. So we need to do more, as sub-Saharan Africa. We need to do more as Sierra Leone to make the fight against corruption very much productive, that will translate in the lives of the people of Sierra Leone.
Mr. Koroma, this score, and you talked about where the sources, that determine the score. How credible should one rely on the score and look at the sources? Now you're quoting sources that have probably different financial sponsors, different objectives and agenda in terms of how they think with respect to that calendar year, how corruption ranked, and you're using 8 of those to now score. How equitable is it? Do you think it's fair to score a corruption scale based on the reports of these institutions?
Yeah, that is the more reason why I mentioned inter alia that before we select a particular institution and their report in terms of assessing country, that institution would have to go through some kind of rigorous assessment with regards to their integrity and credibility. So if you look at institutions like the African Development Bank, you'll agree with me, it's a reputable institution. If you look at the World Bank report, the World Bank is a credible institution. So we look at the credibility and the integrity of institutions before we consider their report. Mark you, Transparency International is a global brand when you talk about integrity and the fight against corruption. So anything that we do we must ensure that it goes through the proper due diligence and that institution meets the criteria of integrity and credibility before we can consider their report in terms of ranking and assessing country. And this is not only Sierra Leone. Sierra Leone is just one out of 182 countries, that we assessed, globally. So these institutions are very much credible, and I do believe that my brother sitting here from the ACC will allude to the fact that these institutions are credible, and their reports that they put out, even our government rely on them to put in place policies in terms of driving good governance in Sierra Leone.
The reason why I'm concerned, Mr. Kuroma, if you look at the trend since 2018, the CPI score, moving from 33 to 34, just one step up. You are talking about baby steps, and this report or this number speaks to the fact that it comes from a perception of all those institutions you've named that you looked at. But if you look at other institutions that are also grading, corruption, especially Sierra Leone, the MCC puts it at 71%, a score which is high as compared to 34%.
Okay.
And the MCC uses corruption control as a hard eligibility test, whilst you use perception. Okay. Let's look at the two. If someone from government or someone from opposition wants to argue for or against this data and number we have, where should someone go? Is it to the perception or to the MCC scorecard?
Thank you very much. Now, I mentioned earlier that these two institutions, in terms of assessing corruption, looks at different parameters. The MCC, like it's titled, Control of Corruption. And when you talk about control of corruption, what's the institution that comes to mind? It's the Anti-Corruption Commission, because by law, they are supposed to take the lead in terms of fighting corruption. And when you look at control of corruption, you look at the law that we have as a country in terms of fighting corruption. And you will agree with me that we have one of the strongest anti-corruption law in Africa. And countries are coming in to learn from us as to how we had this law in place and how we are faring on. And the commission also is doing their bit in terms of ensuring that they position themselves, having all the mechanisms in place, having a national anti-corruption strategy, having a steering committee, having all of those things to drive the fight against corruption. So the MCC looks at that one mostly. And having all of these things in place, you will agree with me that it is right that we should score 70, 80 in MCC. But the CPI does not look only at control of corruption. It also looks at the other enablers of corruption, other areas that we need to look at. Because corruption is the end product. But before we get to that, there are other things that happens underneath that enables corruption. So if we want to fight corruption holistically, to make tangible impact, we must ensure that we address all of those enablers. Now, let me bring you to the sources, that we looked at. Now, the African Development Bank, what is their main area of focus? Is public sector accountability, access to information, and state capture. Now, when you talk about access to information, what comes to mind is the Right to Access Information Commission. Not so. Not the Anti-Corruption Commission. So another institution also needs to be targeted to ensure that they make the people of Sierra Leone have access, to information, which is also one way of fighting corruption. Because when you have access to information, you'll be able to ask questions to hold authorities accountable. You have the Bertelsmann. The main focus of Bertelsmann is prevention mechanism against corruption in the public sector. Yeah, that one falls under the purview of the ACC, because the mechanisms you have, the IMCs, you know, that institution need to set up, you know, to drive integrity within the MDAs and all of that. You have also corruption prevention and legal enforcement against acts of corruption. Where are we now? The judiciary. So the judiciary also has a role. So it's away now from the ACC. You have the right to access information. You have the judiciary. You talk about transparency and accountability in the legislative. That is parliament. It also captures that in this assessment. And we've had about issues with regards parliament when it comes to transparency and accountability. And we see the handling, you know, of the findings of the Auditor General, you know, during the hearings, you know, what comes out of that one. So parliament is also considered. The executive is also considered, how transparent and accountable the executive is, the presidency is, you know. Then you talk about political party financing, you know. We will not think about this when you talk about the MCC. Political party financing is very, very crucial in terms of tackling corruption. Because if you do not monitor how political parties raise their resources, then at the end of the day, when a party comes to power, what will happen? People who support them, who sponsor them, maybe business people, people who are corrupt, when they are given opportunities in terms of contracts and all of that, what happens? The first thing they want to do is to get back the money that they've invested in the party, and that will create room for corruption. So these are all of the parameters that the CPI looks at. It's not only limited to the fight against fighting corruption, which is directly on like the institution, the Anti-Corruption Commission looking at laws and some other parameters, but it goes beyond that to look at other institutions, you know, that if they put mechanisms in place, they address the issue of transparency and accountability, and they deliver well in those areas, I do believe that will be able to make tangible impact in the fight against corruption. And in rankings like this, we'll see our country scoring above the average, which is 50.
Let me bring in Abubakar Utue, the Director of Outreach and Public Relations at the ACC. Abubakar, from 33 to 34, is that a good score?
Well, I would say when you look at where we came from, and of course I know my brother here, Edward, has already laid the foundation of how this all started. And of course, there were times when we had things like 29, 30. So it means we are really making progress. And of course, last year, the score was 33. And this year is 34. And if you look at also the sub-Saharan average score, which is 32, you know that Sierra Leone is making progress, because you look at, like my brother said, the legislative framework that we have as a nation. You look at the Anti-Corruption Act of 2008 as amended in 2019. It is one of the strongest legislations when it comes to the fight against corruption in Africa. So you also look at the steps that are being taken, I mean, the fight against corruption, the area of control of corruption. You look at, like last year, for example, you look at the conviction rates, we had 100% conviction rate. You also look at things like recoveries, asset recoveries, which we have really embarked on. So all of these things put together, yes, you may say, as Edward stated, there are baby steps, but I think it is really good progress for our nation.
And can you share, you know, figures or convictions, you know, recovery of assets and, that you just mentioned, and also prevented losses for the past 2 years? Because whilst Mr. Koma was also talking, he mentioned other institutions as well. And the ACT has an umbrella responsibility to also ensure those institutions are in check when it comes to corruption-related issues. You know, if you're not the papa, not the host, the picking a need for the under control. How robust is the ACC to ensure that, you know, we stop going back and forth? 29, 30, 31, 32 this year, 33, 34, and then we come back again. When are we going to pass the threshold, the 50%?
Yes.
The MCC uses a different barometer, and there's a high score there. But if you look at the data Mr. Koma just gave from 2014 or 2012 to now, we're still within from 28 to 34 and 35. We're still battling within that. So yes. Why aren't we going above that?
Well, again, when it comes to the fight against corruption, it is something very difficult to do, I would say, because you look at the fact that even your own progress, the progress of the institution, the Anti-Corruption Commission, also depends on what other institutions are doing. Like, for example, you made mention of the judiciary. But thankfully, some of these institutions are really now cooperating, especially when it comes to the fight against corruption. Like I said, there were cases in courts which had stalled for quite a very long time. But last year, we realized that most of the recent cases that we had in court, verdicts were given. And of course, all the cases last year, we had 100% conviction rate. So you look at that kind of cooperation, you think we are really making progress. But again, the fight against corruption is not solely in the hands of the Anti-Corruption Commission. We just play the leadership role. It also depends on institutions like Parliament, for example. My brother was talking about the audit report. You know, there was a time when ACC was really in charge of the audit report. We saw the progress that we made. You know, every year we came out with press releases on some of the tangible interventions that we made. We told the people of this country the recoveries that were made, the people that were investigated and charged to court for because of the problems that we had in the audit report. Again, Parliament now says it is their primary responsibility to really look into the audit report. So that has been given to them. But again, for us as a nation, we think when an institution like the ACC has been really established, everything related to the fight against corruption should really be left in the hands of the institution. And everybody saw the progress that we are making, especially when it comes to the audit report. So again, as an institution, we are doing everything within our means, everything that is provided for inside the Anti-Corruption Act of 2008. But if you have other institutions who should also play their own role in the fight against corruption and they are not doing it, sometimes there lies the problems.
This improvement you're talking about, is it because of institutions that are now stronger or because of individuals in key positions within the institution? Because if we're talking of the judiciary, we've seen the reforms that the current Chief Justice has made. In his capacity as the Chief Justice, there are so many reforms now one can point to. So is it as a result of individuals like these, or should we concentrate on institutions themselves to be stronger?
It boils down on leadership. You know, when you have very strong leaders in some of these institutions, you see the progress. You see tangible progress from those institutions. And that is why sometimes we really call on other institutions, especially the leadership of those institutions, to really take their leadership responsibility seriously. Because for us at the ACC, we play our own part. Of course, we know the kind of commissioner that we have. And of course, you look at institutions like Audit Service, you see the kind of impact that they are creating. You spoke about the judiciary. We have a very young and dynamic Chief Justice, Justice Commander. You know, you look at the kind of leadership that he is right now providing. So we think other institutions, especially MDAs, ministries, departments, and agencies of government, they should also really come on board in the fight. And when it comes to the fight against corruption, there are several layers. You have the presidential will, for example, but there is also the political will. And when it comes to the political will, you have to look at all institutions of government, ministries, departments, and agencies of government. What are they doing in making sure that they put systems in place in order for corruption really not to thrive within their institutions? So if you have that, if you have those kind of strong leadership in those institutions, then believe me, these problems that we are talking about will be a thing of the past. But the good thing is, like my brother mentioned, when you look at the MCC, for example, for our own role, we know we are doing very well, especially when it comes to the controlling corruption. Because when you look at the MCC, that, like you mentioned earlier, it looks at the steps, the things that the institution, the Anti-Corruption Commission, is doing in controlling corruption. It is not saying corruption does not exist. It does not say corruption is not prevalent. But when corruption happens, what is the institution taking the lead in the fight against corruption doing? So that is why we are almost always rated highly. You look at the past 8 years consecutively, percentage score is more than 70%. So it tells you the Anti-Corruption Commission is really doing well. But you look at the sometimes the area of CPI, the perception, it's a perception thing. And it is about the experience people really feel to access basic services. Let's say, for example, you go to EDSA and you want a piece of meter, for example. There is probably somebody within the institution, sometimes lower level staff, who will ask you for bribes that you are not supposed to pay for. So all of these experiences normally guide, or they are an end product of what we normally see in the CPI. So again, that is why sometimes we say, when you look at the National Anti-Corruption Strategy, the new one that we are rolling out right now, we always say that it is really good for us to mainstream technology in some of these institutions, because the human contact, you go for a simple thing like an ID card, you have to go through people. You have to ask. In some other countries, you just do everything online. You do your application online, everything is online. Even the printing out, no sooner the ID card is printed out, it is posted to you. You do not physically need to go to that institution. So if we mainstream technology in some of these institutions, I think some of these things will be a thing of the past.
Let's come to the issue of or aspect of enforcement and accountability. When it comes to corruption issues in Sierra Leone, many people tend to have their own views about it differently. Some may want to agree with you here that, you know, there are progress, and others may look at it differently, that, you know, we're still stuck where we are when we talk about corruption. Mm-hmm. So now that begs in my question, how independent is the ACC operationally?
Operationally, we have that independence. It's good you use that kind of word, operational independence. That we have. And I can assure you that we have it 100%. Probably the other kind of independence which we'll say we do not have is like the financial independence or economic independence, you know, because of course we are a public institution and we rely solely on government for our operations. For example, every year we have to give accounts of our stewardship to Parliament, especially on the way we utilize the funds that are allocated to us. And so again, sometimes that is also the problem. You know, sometimes you want something, you have so many things within your activities that you really want to undertake, but there is a cap that is sometimes given to us and we have to work within that cap. So I think that is sometimes the problem. But when it comes to operations, I can tell you it is 100% independence, because there has never been a time when the commissioner, for example, will have to go to State House or go to Parliament to ask the Speaker or the President on whether or not to indict a particular individual. That has never happened and it will never happen. So for us, we have that operational independence. What we are struggling with, it is the area of the finances. So because we rely solely on government, it is all the funds. My salary is paid by the government. The fuel that the institution uses to run the institution is provided for by the government. So sometimes there lies the problem.
Among the various sectors, you know, what sector would you say, I mean, on behalf of the ACC, would you say reports the most corrupt issues? Or I mean, in terms of complaints?
Okay, when it comes to the areas of complaints, we have a report center at the ACC, and it normally compiles the reports that we receive. You know, the reports normally vary. We have reports sometimes, especially from the education sector. We have reports from especially those related to Ministry of Lands. Sometimes these basic things, people going to EDSA, for example, to acquire meter, sometimes these are the problems people face. And these are the common complaints that we have. Problems with traffic police, you know, these are sometimes the reports that normally come to us. But again, the good thing is we have a very strong complaint mechanism wherein when these complaints come in, sometimes the complaints that come to the Anti-Corruption Commission, they are not matters that really relate to us. They are not under our jurisdiction. But what we normally do is to ensure that we compile all these cases. We also do referrals to some of the institutions. So, for example, if it's a case for Human Rights Commission, we refer those cases to Human Rights Commission. And it does not just end there. We normally do follow-ups, because the people that report to us, it's because of the confidence that they have in the commission. That is why sometimes they just think we can handle all types of cases. So that is why they come to us. But sometimes, so what we do when we receive some of those other cases, we refer them to maybe the Ombudsman's office, the Human Rights Commission, and other institutions that should really address some of those cases, and we normally do follow-up to ensure that we give feedback to the persons that made those complaints.
Don't you think it's worrisome? You mentioned something just now that just, clicked in my head about the financial challenges,
Okay.
from the ACC, for an institution that's, Matia, for an institutions that, do a work like that in terms of commission of inquiries and stuff like that for other sectors. You guys are still lacking in that behind in terms of finances.
Yeah.
And let's talk in that regard. Don't you think it's worrisome? And also, how strong is the staffing at the ACC?
Well, again, for us, we just have to battle with this, because this is what the law provides for. We are a public institution. The day the people of Sierra Leone really want that to stop, then I think the best thing to do is to go to Parliament, talk to them, say, henceforth, ACC should go financially independent. But again, there should also be mechanisms on how to fund ourselves. So it is not just about taking out that financial independence from us, but you also have to think of ways to how we can really finance ourselves. But again, for us, we think we can still receive funds from governments and still be independent operationally. And that is what we've been doing. That does not jeopardize the independence of the commission. So, for example, if we receive, let's say, 30 billion loans a year from government, it doesn't mean those at the Minister of Finance should dictate the way we do our operations. No. And in fact, you must have heard that there were times when we had even investigated people right there at the Ministry of Finance. They give us the money. They normally do the allocations to us, but it does not stop us from undertaking our work as an independent institution.
Quickly before we come over to you, Emmanuel, you mentioned something around the complaints or complaints,
Yes.
level.
Yes.
But it's also, when we talk about corruption, people sometimes tend to be afraid or sometimes very reluctant in terms of reporting cases.
Yes.
So are people really willing, to report corrupt cases, to the Anti-Corruption Commission?
Yes, that I would say. People are really willing to report to the commission, because they know that whenever they come to us, the kind of protection that is given to them, they know that when they report any matter to us, it is in confidence. We do not divulge whatever matter that they report to us, so they have that confidence in the ACC. And that is why, in fact, last year we also made sure that we strengthen the protection that is given to complainants. That is why now we have a full-fledged whistleblower and witness protection regulations that we've passed in Parliament. So again, this is also to embolden those who are out there to report to the commission. If they have anything that they think is corruption related, they should be free to come to us. And there are also even rewards attached to some of those complaints. So for example, if you come to the commission and make a report to us, and in the end, maybe there are recoveries from that kind of complaints that you made, then definitely some percentage will have to go to you, the complainant. So all these things these compensation and reward schemes have already been provided for any citizen of Sierra Leone who wants to come forward to the commission to make a report to the commission.
Now, Sierra Leone has jumped 5 places in this new index.
In the ranking.
In the ranking, 114 to now 109.
109, yes.
Ahead of 30 countries in Africa and over 60 in the world. And also, we are among only 30 countries in the world that improved in 2026. Now, this is a good figure, you know. Say what you mean about the 34%. It looks somehow not so good when you look at the threshold of 50.
I agree.
But this is a good, it's a good output when you look at the global scale.
Yes.
Are there measures in place? Because we're talking about perception, and they might shift even now as we're speaking. People still have different perception about how corruption obtains.
I agree.
Would this perception shift in the future to allow that percentage moved from 34 to somewhere within around the 40s?
Our aim right now is to, especially when it comes to the ranking, is for us within the next 2 to 3 years to be in the 2 digits. So we come up from the 100, forget completely about 100. So we be in, let's say now, from 99 downwards when it comes to ranking. So again, it is a very difficult task to do. I can't shy away from that. But the other thing we should also do, not only from the Commission side, but like we started off, it also has to do with other institutions, other MDs, how, for example, Parliament will take the audit report seriously, how the judiciary will continue to expedite proceedings in court, how MDAs will make sure that they mainstream anti-corruption messages within the institutions. All of these put together, and that is why I told you also that the current national anti-corruption strategy, the focus is to prevent corruption. And the one best way of preventing corruption is to ensure that you mainstream technology. So we reduce the human contact. So for example, it is not everything that should take you to the institution where you want or require a service. So sometimes you just have to go through online and access whatever service that you may want to have for yourself. So again, for this, it takes a lot of money. I should not shy away from this. And you look at the government budget, you look at the fact that government also has so many things to really take care of. It has to take care of the school system, the police, and other very important issues. It is a very difficult thing. And Edward will confirm or agree with me that when you look at the institutions, I mean the countries that are really doing very, very well in the area of control of corruption across the world, they are highly technological countries. You know, they are countries wherein when you go there from the airports, everything is seamless because of the mainstreaming of technology in those countries. So most of the services that citizens will want from the government or from public institutions, they do not have to physically go to those institutions to access those services. So it really has to do with a lot of funding. And that is why recently, I think as recent as last month, a team from the African Development Bank came to the Anti-Corruption Commission. And one of the things the commissioner really stated in that meeting, and one of the appeals that he really made to the African Development Bank, is to ensure that they give this kind of support to institutions. So, for example, if you want an ID card, you want a passport, for example, it does not require you to go physically to those institutions. Even if you were to go there, you know, but some of those manual work that is being done in those institutions, we have to get a drastic reduction in some of those transactions. So for us, we think if we put some of these things in place, definitely we can get there. Because the leadership at the ACC already has shown strong commitment when it comes to addressing corruption or controlling corruption in this country.
All right. Mr. Kuma, from this year's perception, what specific governance areas, you know, are still dragging Sierra Leone's score down?
Okay. In the press release that we put out yesterday when we launched this index, we proffered some recommendations, you know, looking at the parameters considered, in these reports, that we looked at when ranking and scoring Sierra Leone. Firstly, we recommended that there should be an improvement in public sector accountability and access to information. This is very, very key in the fight against corruption, because if you want to hold authorities, your leaders, accountable, you must have access to information, because the information empower you to know about things, and it is that knowledge that you use to hold authorities accountable. But we see the right to access information commission having problems, with MDAs in terms of putting out information to the public. I had the commissioner this morning on 98.1 expressing that concern that MDAs are not complying in terms of putting out information. So you see, that is one way of fighting corruption. So MDAs must be committed, must be proactive in terms of disclosing information. They should not only wait for people to come to them for certain information. Information that are supposed to be in public domain, they must ensure that it is there on their website, on notice board, or wherever where people can access it. Then, in terms of public sector accountability, this is very, very key in the fight against corruption. And one report, that drives us to public sector accountability is the Auditor General's report, which shows you how MDAs, fared on in terms of using public resources, And then the area of accountability is very key. So after this report, has been published by the Audit and the Auditor General's office, then we must ensure that players, stakeholders like the ACC, like Parliament, work in collaboration, coordinate and cooperate very well to ensure, that they bring to account those people found wanting in that report. But what we are seeing of late, between the Anti-Corruption Commission and Parliament is not good for the fight against corruption and for public accountability. It undermines, the fight against corruption and public accountability. We should see these two institutions coming together because they are working for the good of Sierra Leone. This should go beyond personal ego, wherein maybe the chairman of the PAC in Parliament will think that this is my right to take the lead, and then ACC will say this is my right to take the lead. So it's ego, coming into play here. So when you think about Sierra Leone is the bigger picture. Let's forget about our individual differences and put Sierra Leone first. And when reports of this nature comes out, we should work together, ACC, Parliament, all other stakeholders, to ensure that these people account for the use of public money. Now, in the area of accountability also, even for the bit that Parliament is doing through the Public Accounts Committee in Parliament, we have 3 layers when it talks about accountability. So if we want to see proper accountability, punishing people for being corrupt, those 3 layers needs to be very much effective. Now, the first layer is set the standards. We have the standards, we have the laws that guides public officials how they should use public money. Yeah, we have the Anti-Corruption Commission Act, you have the Public Procurement Act and all of that. That we have. And then the second layer is the answerability, wherein you create the platform where public officials come to answer for their actions. The PAC has it there in Parliament. But how effective are they in terms of calling people to come to Parliament, to answer for their actions? You will see them, maybe they have 1-2 hearings today, and then it takes 2-3 weeks, you have another hearing, because Parliament have other things to do. So they should collaborate with other institutions to ensure that they fast track, these hearings. So we need to improve, and that second layer also of answerability. And then the last layer, which is very much lacking in Sierra Leone, and that is why we are not making much progress in accountability in terms of fighting corruption, is the sanction area, which is the last level. So if you have the laws, people flout the law, then you bring them to answer, then at the end of the day, what happens to them? It is that last area, what happens at that last area will serve as a deterrent for others not to involve in corruption. But many a times, the first 2 layers, yes, we are struggling with the second one, but we are doing some amount of public hearing on that. But that sanction area, they say in Creole, kill dog na dog, ya let dog no say, die day. Because when you punish somebody severely for being corrupt, the person behind will be afraid if he wants to engage in corrupt activity. So we need to strengthen all of these layers in terms of ensuring proper, public accountability. That is one.
Just quickly before you
Yes.
you come in, I'd love to ask, now that you mentioned that, in your assessment, would you say we still have, or Sierra Leone still have, that strong political will in the fight against corruption?
Thank you very much for that. Now, political will, most of the time in Sierra Leone, is being misunderstood, right? In Sierra Leone, when you talk about political will, people just limit that to the president and the presidency. No, it goes beyond the president and the presidency, and to encompass all public elected officials, like parliamentarians, and people that have been appointed by the president. They falls within that ring when you talk about political will. So you must have the willingness on the part of the president to make sure that, one, they give Anti-Corruption Commission the latitude to do their work without political interference, provide them with the resources that they need, to adequately tackle corruption. Yeah? And then the parliamentarians, they also falls within that one. They should have the will to fight corruption, to do their work with integrity, transparency, and accountability. Those in the MDAs appointed by the president and all of that should ensure, that they work with transparency and accountability. Then, after political will, the second will that is very much important is the institutional will. You will have the political will, providing the resources, but if the institutions are not ready and willing to fight corruption, it's just business as usual. So what we are saying is that MDAs, those institutions, should be ready to fight against corruption. The ACC is doing their bit, because in the law, we have a provision that MDAs under the strategy should have integrity management committees. And those integrity management committees are supposed to take the lead in terms of injecting integrity, transparency, and all of these issues within their MDAs. But now we see, yes, a lot of MDAs have now put in place their integrity management committees. But how effective and functional are those committees? Are their authorities giving them the resources, the wherewithal to work independently and work effectively to inject, the spirit of integrity, transparency, accountability in the operations? No. And that is the main reason why year in, year out, the same issues, do appear from the Auditor General's report when they assess these MDAs. So we need to ensure that we have those political will. One thing I have been advocating for, and I want to say it here again, most of the time, these MDAs complain about lack of resources. And then you have the civil service also putting in place that MDAs should do things to implement the Auditor General's report. And again, they will tell you they don't have resources. So one thing I've been pushing for in different fora is that it is good every year when the budget year comes, what happens? The Minister of Finance will write letters to the MDAs, which they call the budget called circular, telling them to put together their budget, and this is the focus of the budget for the next financial year. And they will tell them that they should present, I think, about 5 deliverables. These are the key deliverables under which they'll have the different activities. So I've been pushing for the Ministry of Finance, because this should be a collaborative effort, not only the ACC. The Ministry of Finance has a role to play there to ensure that those resources are there. For them to state in that budget called circular that all MDAs in the 5 deliverables that will be presenting during the budget discussions, you should ensure that one of those deliverables speak to the issue of integrity, transparency, and accountability, which will encompass the operations of the integrity management committees, and also actions that will be taken in terms of implementing the Auditor General's report, and then also the recommendations from the systems review, because the Anti-Corruption Commission also conducts systems review of MDAs. They look at the operations of the MDAs as it is. And from the anti-corruption lens, they will say, okay, the way how you are doing this thing, if you continue doing this way, it will create room for corruption. So do it A, B, and C way. You understand? Those recommendations are there. And it is left to the MDAs to implement those recommendations. And even if the ACC do 1,000 systems review, they put together their reports and recommendations, and then the MDAs, you know, and do not implement those recommendations, it will come back to naught, will not make any progress in that area. So they should have in their deliverable an area that speaks to integrity, transparency, and accountability that will capture all of those things, so they will not say they don't have resources. And the last will, which we should consider in the fight against corruption, is the people's will, which is very, very important also. I think it's Marina that mentioned, or you, Mbokari, that mentioned the fact that some people are scared, yes, Marina, of reporting corruption. So the people must be willing and ready, you know, to stand up against corruption, because the commission cannot be everywhere at the same time. But we should know as a people that if the ACC is leading and we as a civil society outfit is supporting in terms of fighting corruption, they also have the responsibility to stand up and speak up, you know, against corruption, irrespective of whatever sentiment, political, regional, or whatever. Let's forget about that. But many a times you will see people, when maybe they indict somebody that belongs to their political party or from their region, you see a fraction of Sierra Leoneans, even though they know the person is wrong, the person has done something wrong in terms of corrupt activities, you will see them rallying, you know, behind that person, just because the person belongs to their political party or from their region and all of that. So the citizens' thinking should transcend that. They should know that this is for the benefit of the people of Sierra Leone, not because I as an individual is benefiting from this person that has been found wanting for corrupt activities, but we should think Sierra Leone. So the citizens must be ready. So the political will must be there, the institutional will must be there, and the people's will must be there. When all of those wills are there, functioning effectively, then we'll make tremendous impact, you know, and strides in the fight against corruption.
Today, as we round off, there's also the issue of asset declaration.
Yes.
You know, every year you see SEC pull notice, asset declaration, you know, and you also have those who will not declare the assets. And recently, on the commissioner's page on Facebook, we saw a beautiful house of someone who was found wanting.
Yes.
So I was not thinking of the house. I was thinking, didn't this person declare this asset? You know, when the ACC asked for asset declaration, this is a government official that was working for the NRA. And if they have been declaring the assets, why weren't these assets captured in the declaration? There seems to be a huge issue around asset declaration. You have people who declare false assets or who declare no asset at all. And at the end of the day, if ACC comes after them, we start seeing all these beautiful houses around town belonging to these individuals.
Well, you know, the thing about asset declaration, I'll tell you that we have one of the most robust assets declaration regime in Africa. But like you mentioned, that is one of the challenges that we have, the area of verification. You know, people will declare their assets, but sometimes doing the verification is another huge challenge for us. So for us, in most cases, when the time will trigger the asset declaration thing is sometimes when we have investigations. So let's say, for example, there is an individual from, let's say, Ministry of Finance that is being investigated. So that person, one of the first points of call is for us to look at his asset declaration form. Let's see what he declared, you know. And don't forget the case you spoke about. That one was one that was related to an unexplained wealth. And this is also how we really know the kind of wealth people have, whether it is unexplained or it is really lawful wealth. Because for the asset declaration regime, it will really be useless if we do not really follow up on some of these things. Verification, the area of verification is very, very important. And that is why the commission, recently, we think we should really put much more emphasis in the area of asset declaration, especially in the area of verification, because it is really good. Let's say, for example, the individual you stated, if we had, let's say, for example, verified the assets that he declared, probably we would have really picked this up long time ago. But this is something we are really going to embark on. And but again, sometimes it's also about the funds, because people will tell you, I have a house in Bo District, I have another one in McKinney, another one in Freetown. So it's really entails a lot for you to go through all those asset declaration forms and look at what people really declared and how to really verify those assets. But again, the commissioner has really spoken of the determination of the commission to ensure that assets will be verified, especially for this year, because this year is an asset declaration year. So we'll ensure that it does not just stop at people coming to the office to declare their assets, but we also have to do follow-up, look at the assets declared, and sometimes even do some kind of investigation to ensure that what really they declared in their asset declaration form is what really entails. This is something very, very important.
And lastly, what would realistically move Sierra Leone into the 40s when we talk of the perception itself, and to bring us into the 2 digits, in the next 2 or 3 years?
Let's mainstream technology in all our operations. So for example, if there is an institution collecting money for government, you do not need to physically go to a cashier in that institution for you to pay whatever thing you are supposed to pay to government. Let's mainstream technology in some of those institutions, and let us try as best as possible to be open to the public. Edward was talking about the right to access information. There are times when people even crave for information, things as basic as, let me just know whether this individual works for this institution. They cannot provide those answers. So for us at the commission, for us to really get to those 2 digits, for us to really ensure that we make marked improvements when it comes to the average score, the global average score, it is for all other institutions to really come on board. Let's mainstream technology, let us prevent, and this also has to do with the Anti-Corruption Commission, and this is something we've been doing a lot in the past. But the other problem is the area of implementation of the recommendations, as Edward rightly stated. You give sometimes some of these institutions the recommendations, even though they really quite well know that these recommendations will really enhance service delivery in the institutions. Some of them will just sit by and not do anything. So sometimes these are sometimes the problems. But again, we also have a clause within the Anti-Corruption Act where we can invoke sanctions against some of those institutions, and this is something we will continue to do. But again, all institutions should really come on board. Parliaments should play their oversight role effectively. Let the institutions normally named in the audit reports, let them be held accountable. Other institutions, make sure you mainstream anti-corruption messages within your institutions. It is not just about saying, oh yes, I'll champion the anti-corruption cause within my institution. Mainstream certain things. Like Edward was saying about the integrity management committees. These committees are so important within the institutions because they ensure that if there is any issues, especially those that have to do with service delivery or corruption, petty corruption or grand corruption, they normally take care of them, take care of those complaints first before they refer them to the commission. So if, let's say for example, a particular individual goes for a service and he cannot get that service adequately or promptly, it is for the IMC to pick up some of those institutions. And because most of the complaints that we normally have is just lack of effectiveness in those institutions. And believe you me, if you go for a service and you cannot get it promptly, the next thing that happens is corruption, because the next thing the person will think of is to have to pay or bribe his way for him to get the service as quick as possible. So if we can take care of some of those things, we mainstream integrity management committees within those institutions, and we take care of those other petty corruption issues that normally come up, believe me, we will make the required progress in the next 2 years.
All right, thank you very much. Abubakar Tui, and also to you, Edward Koema, for joining us this morning.